Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Discovery Sunday with me, Sunshine Ross, Awake Space. We're here at Château de Montcuquet in Lautrec. Been here for a month now. Everything's fab. I'm awake, not like last week, no, last month with Rue. I was half asleep, more half asleep than half awake, really. Just an immense amount of work and trauma, which is which is our topic for this evening. So my guest for tonight is Manouk Tideman. And well, I met her when I was going through a traumatic experience myself, or just coming out of a traumatic experience myself. And we'll talk about what is trauma, what consists of trauma in a little while. But so I had a very bad car accident. I think it was 3 years. Has it been 3 years now? Something like 3 or 2 years ago.
Yep.
And I went to the hospital, had surgery, and I had to do this teacher training like 10 days after surgery. And of course, another teacher training after that. So I needed help. And when we spoke to each other, I actually had a neck brace. And the first thing she said was, "What happened to you?" And so I had to tell her everything. And very fortunate that she is an I-AYT registered teacher. So that's the International Alliance of Yoga Therapists. They have their own special training for yoga therapy, because actually within Yoga Alliance, there are certain rules where you're not allowed to use the word yoga therapy. It would be under strict guidelines and strict conditions. I think it's also about the type of qualifications that you have. So Manouk has those qualifications, those special qualifications that we mere mortal teachers don't. Mere mortal yoga teachers. And so it was a beautiful experience with this teacher training with Manouk. And she was telling me about her own story, about her experience of what happened to her, which we could consider trauma, when she was in her 20s. So maybe I'll let Manouk tell you all about that. Hi, Manouk, how are you this evening?
Hi, Sunshine. I'm good. It's really lovely to be here. I really appreciate the invitation. So thank you for arranging this. Well, Sunshine's already introduced me a little bit. I'm a certified yoga therapist, which means I've done about 1,000 additional hours of training spread out over 3 years. And well, it's a long story short, we take a much more biomedical approach to the practice of yoga. And one of the key areas we also focus on is incorporating trauma-informed aspects into yoga sessions. When I was in my early 20s, I had to undergo some rather major open heart surgeries. I was born with a congenital heart defect. However, in my early 20s, I got quite sick. So they decided that I should have this open heart surgery to fix what's known as a leaky valve. And that involved a sternotomy, which means opening up the sternum, fixing things in there, and then closing you up. Now, the first surgery didn't work, so 5 days later, I had to go through the same surgery. And this can certainly be considered a traumatic event, both on a physical level, but also on a mental and an emotional level.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, 5 days is not enough for your body to just on a
anything
physical
else you
level.
wanted me to share there, son?
Yeah, sorry? It's 5 days isn't enough for your body to recover. Yeah, certainly. So that leads me to my first question is,
Sorry, no, the connection.
Yeah. So what would you consider trauma? What is trauma when we talk about trauma? What is your definition?
Oh, there's many definitions. Some of the definitions that I'm most drawn to is that trauma can be defined as any event that is temporarily really overwhelming and exceptionally distressing, and it can leave lasting psychological and physical symptoms. What people often misconceive is that trauma is not actually the event itself, but it's the residue left in the body and mind from experiencing that event. And one of my favorite definitions or descriptions of trauma comes from Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, a very well-known psychiatrist in the US. And what he says is that trauma is not the story of something that happened back then, but it's the current imprint of the pain, horror, and fear living inside that person after the event has occurred.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good distinction there. So it's not the event, but it's really more what we carry inside of us and the after effects of that. Could it be possible that we have trauma, so the residue of it, but not realize it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, many people don't realize until years after the event has occurred. For some people, they might not even experience any symptoms for a long time. And then something happens later on in their life that triggers the memory inside their body of that initial traumatic event.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Because a lot, I think trauma-informed yoga, when I first heard about it, it was really new. And I just thought, oh, I don't really have any traumatic experiences in my life. Or, but then thinking about it, maybe also you can come from a society or a generation that doesn't like to speak about those things. So can you speak a little bit about that? How do we know that we have trauma? Are there hidden trauma? Maybe like, are there any signs that we have some hidden trauma?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think firstly, what you were explaining is really important as well, is for everybody, trauma can look different. It can be as unique as your fingerprint. Now, certain studies say that at this point in our society, a global society, up to 90% of us are going to experience at least one traumatic event in our lifetime. Now, what this doesn't mean is that 90% of people in the world are traumatized. Because just because you experience a traumatic event doesn't necessarily mean that you have PTSD or that you will suffer from symptoms of trauma. And a good way to understand this, if you don't mind me using a car accident as an example, is that two people may be sitting in a car and they may have an accident. One person might respond with an overactive sympathetic nervous system. So they might try to fight or flight the situation. They might get out of the car, run away, or they need to do something with their body in that moment. Whereas the person in the passenger seat might have a completely different response. They might freeze.
Freeze, yes.
They might get stuck. So they have an extreme parasympathetic nervous system response. And then you could even have a third person in that car sitting in the back seat who experiences the event but brushes it off and doesn't actually see it as a traumatic experience.
That's so fascinating. Does that have anything to do with resilience? And what is resilience?
Oh, that's a good topic to uncover as well. I think it's dependent on so many different factors. So the true answer to that question is it depends. It could be based on our childhood, how our parents handled stressful or traumatic situations and how we perceive that. It could be based on our culture, as you were saying. In certain cultures, it's more open to talk about such experiences. In other cultures, we might push it under the rug. So, and with regards to resilience, yes and no, because you may have the most resilient person who handles very difficult situations, for example, a car accident, but then when their marriage falls apart and they have to go through a divorce, they might respond completely differently to that and view that as a very traumatic event.
True.
So it's a very subjective topic.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Glenn was more traumatized than me during the car accident.
Yeah.
But in terms of like daily life, his level of like his level of tolerance for stress is much higher. Like I'd be freaking out at paperwork and he wouldn't. So
Yeah, exactly. And I guess another way that we could view this concept of resilience is, I kind of think of it like loads on a big shipping boat, like containers on those big shipping boats that go around the world. And for some people, they can handle a couple of containers and the boat doesn't sink. But for others, maybe just one or two containers, and here these containers are representing a very stressful or traumatic event, maybe just a few containers cause the boat to sink.
Yeah. And we can't judge, and it's probably not a good yogic trait to judge people like, oh, you're weak, can't handle stress.
Yeah. I also always say, and this comes also up later in some of our questions, I think, is being a traumatized person doesn't mean you're weak or incapable. If anything, it shows a lot of strength and resilience. The fact that you went through that event and then that you show up in a yoga class. So these are people who deserve to be celebrated and not judged at all because they've taken that step to be there. So these are, people think, oh, a trauma-informed yoga class, it has to be very sensitive, very delicate, very careful. And whilst, yes, we have to be mindful with the language we use, how we present certain poses or practices, but we also have to be the cheerleader here and to celebrate the fact that these people have gone through something and now they're taking active steps to come to a very healing space and to support calming and nourishing their nervous system.
Yeah, that's a great point right there. Yeah. Celebrating and honoring what they've been through. So that brings me to my next question. Coming to a trauma-informed yoga class, what is a trauma-informed yoga class? How is that different from just the regular class that we teach?
Good question as well. Yeah. So firstly, trauma-informed yoga is not a specific style of yoga. So it's not like you suddenly learn a whole bunch of new poses that you didn't know before, but rather it's an individualized approach to how you teach yoga. So it's not so much what you teach, but how you're teaching. And what this might look like is, for example, in a trauma-informed setting, we place a bit more consideration on the language we might use to explain certain yoga poses. A good example of this can be happy baby pose, Supta Ananda. Now, in a traditional yoga class, and I'm speaking very generally, because every teacher teaches poses obviously in a slightly different way, but some instructions we might give to bring someone into a happy baby pose is, okay, lie on your back, lift your legs in the air, hold onto your feet, and rock around like a happy baby.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not to say that yoga teachers are doing that wrong. They're giving
Sounds
the
general enough.
instruction.
Mm-hmm.
But in a trauma-informed, yeah, exactly. So it's not wrong. But in a trauma-informed setting, we might be a little bit more considerate as to how we approach this pose, particularly because of, firstly, the use of the word child, happy baby.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody had a happy childhood.
Yeah.
So to say to someone, well, rock around like you're a happy child or a happy baby, that can trigger someone to think, well, I actually didn't have a very happy childhood, or I don't have any memories of being a happy baby. So that can make that person feel really alienated in that moment during that class. Obviously, the position in itself can be very vulnerable. So for survivors of sexual abuse, lying on the back, having the legs in the air, might not be the position we would intend to bring them into.
Mm-hmm.
Some things we could do there, for example, is rather than calling the pose happy baby pose, we might call the pose reclining bliss pose, which is the more actual translation. If you look at the Sanskrit name of the pose,
Supta
Supta, reclining, Ananda, bliss.
Bliss.
So these are just some of the, it's like refining the way you teach rather than learning something completely new, and just being a little bit more conscious of how your words might be received by another. The last example I'll give there is Shavasana.
Mm-hmm.
Using words like corpse pose can also be quite triggering. Having someone lie flat on their back.
Now let's
Yeah.
all pretend we're
Having
dead.
someone lie flat on their back. Yeah, let's all pretend we're, yeah. For example, for myself, you know, I went through surgery where I was put completely under.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have good memories of lying flat on my back, not being able to. So for me, you know, that's something that would bring up this memory for me if I was told, lie flat on your back and don't move, be still.
Yeah.
So again, in trauma-informed yoga, we might say, well, what could we do to make this pose feel more comfortable? So something we could do, which we often do in restorative yoga, is we create a reclining shavasana. So we use a bolster and a block so that the person's slightly elevated. Now, firstly, this doesn't feel so vulnerable because they're not lying flat on their back. They're slightly more upright. Secondly, this person can see a bit more of what's going on around them. So this also helps to create a feeling of safety, which is so fundamental for getting the body and the mind to relax.
Yeah. So it sounds a bit like I would need to know as a teacher what type of trauma this person has been through, whether it's mental, emotional, physical, what type of trauma experience they've been through. So are most of the classes one-on-one, or how does that work? Can you do a group class?
Yeah, so absolutely, you can do both. The extent that we need to know about someone's trauma isn't as relevant as just having the tools to create a safe space. Because we have to remember our scope of practice as well as yoga teachers. We're not psychologists, we're not mental health professionals. So it's also not our job to say, tell me all the details of your trauma and I'm going to tell you how yoga is going to fix that all. Our job is to say, hey, welcome to this safe space. Welcome to a space where you have choice, where you'll feel empowered, where I am there to support you through the practice and not tell you exactly what you should do and how you should do it. When it comes to differentiating between physical, mental, and emotional trauma, is most traumatic events will have some effects on our physical, mental, and emotional states. It's very intertwined, and it can be quite hard to differentiate. So for example, and again, I hope you don't mind that I use a car accident.
Go ahead, traumatize me more.
It's just it's you know, it's just one that allows us to look at the perspective of trauma from a lot of different angles. Is a car accident can lead to physical trauma. You know, there can be injury, there can be broken bones, whiplash, bruising. But what a car accident can also trigger is episodes of anxiety. These are brought about by the emotional and mental trauma of intense fear, feeling out of control, feeling guilty perhaps for allowing the event to occur in the first place. And again, I'll draw, you know, back on my own example with regards to surgery, is when we undergo surgery, we are aware that the body is facing physical trauma. But what we don't always recognize is that there's that mental and emotional aspect as well. When you go under anesthetic, your deepest level of sensory awareness knows you're being cut open and rearranged. And this can lead to symptoms such as muscle bracing, trembling, anxious thoughts, feeling emotionally triggered, and even having nightmares. So I give these examples just to demonstrate how difficult it can be to separate our physical, mental, and emotional states, which, you know, again, draws quite nicely back into yoga, right? Where we recognize a very strong connection between the different layers of the body. For example, if we take the Pancha Maya Kosha model.
That's right.
So we have to be mindful of all of these things as well.
Yeah, it's really hard to separate them, and one really does affect the other. So you would see almost like a domino effect, that there would be some rippling in all of our consciousness, in all of these different bodies. The energy body as well. I mean, we talked about mental, emotional, physical. Your energy body as well. I think it can have an effect on your spiritual body. After my surgery, I retreated into my spiritual body and just hid there. Like I was walking around like a zombie, pretty much like a ghost, and just doing things, but I was pretty much all in my spiritual body. And my vortex healing teacher noticed it. So he brought me back and just stop hiding there. Come back. We don't want you there. That's so. What would you think? What would be the goal of a trauma-informed yoga class? Because like you said, we're not therapists. We're not there to they might not even want to tell us their whole story. So what would be the goal of the class?
So there'll be many cases where you as a yoga teacher might have someone in your class who's experienced trauma and you have no idea about it. There are certain observations you can make. For example, you might notice there's an overactivation of the sympathetic nervous system, or you might notice that person is very tired, withdrawn, struggling to connect with their body, or even listen to the instructions of the teacher. So there are certain signals we can look out for. But again, when you become a trauma-informed yoga teacher, you make the assumption that whatever class you teach, there is likely to be someone in that class who may have experienced trauma. When it comes to the goal of a trauma-informed yoga class, I think there's a couple of intentions we can have there. Safety. The goal of a trauma-informed yoga class can be to create a sense of safety. Because if we don't feel safe, it's very hard for us to feel present because our brain is constantly trying to observe our surroundings. It might be ruminating on past experiences, or our amygdala might be firing off make-believe examples of what could happen in the future, because the body, all the brain wants to do is try and keep you safe. So creating a safe space, that's a goal. Secondly, to facilitate an environment in which a person can go through their healing journey at their own pace. So we could do this with the language we use, inviting lots of choice, making sure students know that they're not there to perform, but simply to practice, to explore, to experience. And also in the setup of the class, instead of having students in rows, we might have ourselves in a circle so that everybody can see each other. And there's no need to look around and think, oh, where am I? Who's behind me? What's that noise? So I think safety. I think safety is a hugely underestimated component, whether it's a trauma-informed class or a regular yoga class. If someone is struggling to connect and to relax, we need to see, have we established safety for this person?
That's a good goal. Polyvagal theory, right? Safety comes first.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the polyvagal theory? And in terms of just safety, and what is the polyvagal theory?
Yeah. Oh, how much time do we have? Yeah. So for those who aren't familiar with polyvagal theory, it was developed by Dr. Stephen Porges. There's books, articles on it, and it's very easy to find nowadays online. There's a lot of YouTube interviews with him, which I do find to be a really helpful resource. And what we have to keep in mind is that it's called a theory, because many of us take it for fact, but in essence, it's called a polyvagal theory for a reason, because it's a theory. There's a lot of focus in this theory on the workings of the vagus nerve, which is the 10th cranial nerve, and it goes from our brainstem and wanders out through the body, right down into the lower intestines. The word vagus comes from the root of the word vaga in Latin, which means to wander. And I'm going to keep going because I'll try to wrap it up and not make it too long. In essence, we have 3 states in which we can operate from. We have the ventral vagal system, which is where we are alert, but we also feel safe. And you can liken this to a child playing in a playground. Their blood pressure's a bit up, they're sweating, their heart's racing, but they feel safe and they're having fun. So this is a ventral vagal state. This is a state in which we connect socially with others and which we also feel at ease. Then we have the sympathetic state, the sympathetic nervous system state, which is often known as the fight-flight response of the body, and the parasympathetic nervous state, which is often referred to as the freeze response of the body. Now, when we experience a very stressful or traumatic event, either we go into this sympathetic mode, this fight-flight mode, heart rate goes up, pupils dilate, we start to sweat, our muscles engage, because we think, how can I overcome this threat? I either need to fight against it or I need to run away from it. Now, what can happen is someone might go through that phase and realize, I don't have the resources or the capacity to overcome this threat. So what happens then is a person sinks into a deep parasympathetic nervous system response. And this comes from our dorsal vagal root. When you're walking down the road and a little lizard crosses the road, what does it do? freezes, right?
Mm-hmm.
It goes, or it'll try to run and it will realize it'll hit a wall and think, oh, I've hit a wall, I can't do anything. But most of the time, these primitive animals, these reptilian animals, they go, maybe if I play dead, the
No one
threat
would
will
see
leave
me.
me alone. Yeah. Another good way to see this is if you watch National Geographic, is the antelope that gets chased by a lion.
Mm.
So if the lion catches the antelope has first engaged its fight-flight response. It's tried to run away from the lion.
Mm.
But unfortunately, the lion has captured the antelope. And what happens then is that the antelope goes limp. It drops down, it becomes still, its heart rate will lower a lot, its blood pressure will drop. And this is a deep parasympathetic state. And the lion thinks, ha, 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 I've done my job. I've got my dinner for tonight. Maybe I can turn around and catch another antelope and that can be dessert. So the lion runs off because it thinks, oh, that antelope, it's there.
Dead.
I'll come grab it later. Exactly. And what this antelope has done, it's a survival response. Once it senses that the lion has run off, this antelope might be able to jump up, shake itself off. Shaking's it's a fantastic way to release stored tension in the body. The antelope's going to shake itself off, and then it's going to run in the opposite direction. So both responses of that antelope were for survival. First, it tried to run. When it couldn't run, it froze. But as a result of freezing, it overcame that stressful situation.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
Yeah.
The antelope. I should watch more National Geographic this time. And what about breathing? What about breathing and pranayama? Is that utilized a lot in trauma-informed yoga? Are there any breaths that I should maybe avoid, or should I go full Wim Hof on everyone?
I love that you use Wim Hof because I think he's the hashtag on almost every Instagram breathing post nowadays. I see a few people laughing. Breathing is a very sensitive topic in trauma-informed yoga, and for good reason. When we experience a stressful or traumatic event, this has an immediate impact on our breath. So again, a good example to take here, and if you don't mind visualizing this, you can do so. And if you say, no, I'll just listen, that's fine. If you visualize yourself stepping out onto a road and you see a car coming towards you at quite a fast speed, what does your breath do? Right?
Yes.
There's a big inhale, you hold your breath, your body tenses. Yeah. Now imagine you don't get hit by the car, you step out on time off the road, you go home and you open the door and your partner, a good friend or a loved one is sitting on the sofa, Netflix is on, there's a glass of wine or a cup of tea, waiting for you. What does your breathing do? Exhale. Body relaxes. Yeah. So there's a very intimate relationship there between the nervous system and our breath. What we can do with pranayama or breathing techniques is reverse engineer this system. So we can use certain pranayamas to initiate a specific response in our nervous system. One of the key ways we can do this is to focus on lengthening our exhales. So that can involve counting for a count of 4 for the inhale, count of 6 for the exhale. Other practices we might do could include just bringing awareness to our breathing. Nowadays, so many of us have dysfunctional breathing patterns. We're holding our breath, we're hyperventilating, We're using the secondary respiratory muscles. So there's a lot of tension in our neck and shoulders. And we get all hyped up and think, well, what breathing technique can I use to fix all of this? When in actual fact, the question you have to ask yourself is, what's my relationship with my breathing in the first place? Do I
Am
have
I
an
even
awareness of it?
aware? Yeah.
Yeah. So in trauma-informed yoga, we're not doing fancy breathing techniques, no Wim Hof, no hanging upside down, holding your breath or anything. But in actual fact, we're looking at building a deeper level of awareness and building a friendship with the process of our breathing in the first place. Especially if we have a dysfunctional breathing pattern, we need to notice that before we start to take action to make changes. Because how do you know where you want to go if you don't know where you're starting, right? When you need to
Definitely.
go from A to B, you look, well, in the old days, you used to look at a map, I guess, and nowadays you look at Google Maps, or, you know, your GPS tells you where to go, but you need to have a point A to know how to get to point B. So in my classes, there's a lot of focus on first connecting with our breath, seeing what's going on there, and then proceeding into some gentle pranayama techniques, such as box breathing, which is often known as samavriti in yoga, elongated exhales. We don't rule out things like Kapalabhati or Bhastrika, because, for example, with Kapalabhati, we might not do it as intensely or forcefully, but just a bit slower and more consciously.
Yeah.
So again, there's no hard and fast rule of you can't do that, but you can do that. Our question is, how can we approach that in a manner that invites consciousness, a feeling of safety, a sense of control?
Yeah, great answer. I also like the way that there's no hard and fast rules like, okay, trauma-informed yoga, you need to do this, 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 this. Because oftentimes it really depends on who's in front of you. And even for us yoga teachers, regular yoga teachers, we don't know, like you said, who's had trauma, who has experienced a traumatizing experience in the class, and who carries that trauma with them. Yeah, we just don't know. I like what you said about the breathing as well, how just being aware of your breath is the first step. And I think as well, energetically, that starts to allow the energy to move, because a lot of trauma becomes blocked energy in your energy body.
Yeah. And especially high up in the body, right? A
Yeah.
lot of stuff gets up here, and we lose a lot of connection with our lower body. So again, something that's quite often focused on in trauma-informed classes is connecting with the lower body as well, allowing energy to flow down into the body through gentle flowing or circular movements, sensing the mat beneath the feet. A nice little trick that I like to use is for people who struggle to feel grounded in Shavasana, I place blocks underneath the soles of their feet, so that even though they're lying flat on their back, they have some sort of sense of something connecting to the soles of the feet to help them feel grounded.
Oh, yeah, that's a really interesting idea. So my last question, and then we can ask everybody else if they have questions as well, is so as a yoga teacher, how can I be more sensitive to people who may have had trauma experience in my class?
Yeah, I love that this is your last question, because I feel like it's going to wrap up so many of the things we've been talking about. So something I always encourage yoga teachers to do is not to assume that they know how a yoga very often I've heard yoga teachers explain a pose by saying, you should feel a stretch here or in this part of your body. And so often I've also had students come to me and say, I think I'm doing it wrong because I don't feel
I
that
don't feel
pose
it
in this
there.
part of my body. Yeah, I feel it somewhere else. And that adds to that person's feeling of, oh, I can't do this, or I'm not capable, which is the opposite of what we want someone to feel in our class. So ways we can be a bit more sensitive to that, for example, is to use our language to say, you might feel sensation in this part of your body, but if you feel it's in this part of your body or another part of your body, that's also amazing. So just that little switch can make such a big difference. What we also don't want to do is treat survivors of trauma like they are broken or very fragile. I don't know how it's with your yoga teacher training, Sunshine, but when I first introduced pregnancy yoga in 200-hour yoga trainings, so many students go, oh, I can't do this. That's way too scary. What do I? Don't touch them. You know, declining soup to butternuts, leave them there like, so, and though pregnant people and people who've experienced trauma aren't the same thing, sometimes that's that same feeling. Yoga teachers go, oh, what do I do? Oh, yeah, and we dance around and we make that person even more anxious and worried about themselves.
It's the
So
opposite, yeah.
So again, what we have to understand is, yes, we need to be considerate with our language and how we hold the space for survivors of trauma in our yoga class. But somebody who has gone through trauma is strong. They have resilience. They've gone through something really tough and they're making their way out on the other side. So our job as the yoga teacher is kind of like to be their cheerleader, to make them feel like they are capable of whatever we're doing in the class, regardless of how advanced or basic, in little brackets, I'll put those, we might call the yoga pose. So we empower them. We see them. That's something that, again, that's so often missing for people nowadays, is the feeling of being seen.
Namaste.
Yeah, I see you.
Yeah.
To celebrate their practice without judgment is also something that I really encourage teachers to do, is whatever they do, however they do it, celebrate that. So, and lastly, just because I find it so important to emphasize, is one way of being more sensitive to people who've experienced trauma as a yoga teacher is to know your scope of practice. We are not mental health professionals unless we've had the additional training to be that. We're not psychiatrists or psychologists. So if someone does come to us and share their story of trauma, our capacity as a yoga teacher is to be able to listen, to show empathy, and to respond with recognition. So a sentence that a sentence I might use to someone who shared their traumatic experience with me, who's come to my yoga class, is to say, wow, I can't imagine what that would have been like to go through, or it sounds like you've had a really tough time lately. And then you set a boundary. You set the boundary to say, it's so nice that you're coming to these yoga classes to connect with yourself. And have you considered seeing a mental health professional about this experience you've gone through?
Yeah. That's so important, the scope of practice as well. And I really love what you said about seeing them. Seeing them. I wish all classes were we should make all classes like that. That would be really cool.
Oh, but again, I think, it's like I said, it's not a completely different style of yoga. It's, if anything, it's a necessary lens we should be bringing to all of our yoga classes nowadays. I don't advertise my classes as this is a trauma-informed yoga class. I say people who've experienced trauma are welcome here. You know, I make it regardless of what I'm teaching. I add the trauma-informed lens. And I'll tell you something, the amount of students I've had returning to my classes because they say, I feel safe. I know I have choices. I know that you see me. I know that you are helping me to listen to my body. It's incredible how that's evolved over the years as a result of including these trauma-informed principles.
That's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Manouk. But before you go, let's just ask anybody if they have any questions for Manouk.
I saw something come up in the chat. I don't know who wrote something, but maybe a question came up there.
Let's see. What sort of boat do you have?
That was you, Jules.
Yeah, of course.
A Dutch boat?
Was it a dinghy or was it a big sailing ship or a big... Everyone has a different boat.
She's got
a
barge.
It might...
I'll be honest.
Yeah, you are... Yeah.
It took me a second to figure out what you were asking me. I was like, I don't have a boat.
It's a Dutch barge.
In the moment, it worked. When you said it was kind of like, yeah, but it depends on what kind of boat you have. But in reflection, when you go back, what type of boat do you have? It's like, well, today I think I have a little kayak. It could be one.
Yeah, that's the question.
But
did your boat change?
Well, it can, absolutely. And what I would say this refers to is our window of tolerance.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So some of us have a smaller window of tolerance, meaning there's less stress we can handle before our boat sinks. So if we have a small window of tolerance, you might be a dinghy boat. So a couple of loads get put on there and you sink. Others may have a wider window of tolerance, and therefore we might be more of a cargo ship and we can handle more weight, more loads before that boat would go under. Yoga's been proven to be one of the ways in which we can help to widen our window of tolerance.
Yeah.
And one of the styles of yoga that I like to incorporate is yin yoga, because whilst yin yoga does facilitate relaxation, it also asks you to listen very deeply to the sensations occurring in your body. So it's asking you to tune in to sometimes a bit of discomfort. And it's reminding you that, hey, even though you're feeling this discomfort right now, you are safe and you are going to come out of this. And if we can translate that mentality from our yoga to our life, we can learn to teach ourselves, hey, I'm experiencing something uncomfortable right now. I'm going through something challenging, but I know I have the tools to feel safe, and I know I will come out of the other side of this. And that's how we start to widen that window of tolerance. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. And even like, can I go deeper in this pose? Can I take more, just a few millimeters more, and then translate that to maybe I can take more in my life. The extra little,
and oftentimes in yin yoga, because we hold those poses, because we're holding the poses for a few minutes, we can find often that halfway through that pose, we do have the ability to move a little deeper. So again, that can translate so well in saying sometimes by experiencing some of that discomfort and recognizing it and noticing the sensation, this helps us build the capacity to sit with that sensation a bit longer, or to move through it a little deeper. Something I always do encourage students is to really distinguish between what is discomfort and what is pain. Because we don't want people to experience pain in our yoga classes. Pain makes the body tense up, it activates the sympathetic nervous system, and it makes us resistant. So for me, pain is when our breathing changes in some way, or we tense our facial muscles. So think of when you've held Navasana or boat pose for too long, and your breathing stops and your face goes like this, and you're like, oh, how much longer do I need to do this? Actually, it's a signal that we might be overreaching our limits and the body is starting to experience pain. But for example, if we're holding a pigeon pose, which is known as sleeping swan in yin yoga, we might notice there's a deep stretch going on, maybe in the area of the glutes, maybe somewhere else. But if we're able to keep our face relaxed, to keep breathing fluidly, ideally through the nose, then we can say, okay, although I'm experiencing some discomfort in this moment, I know I have the ability to breathe through it. I know I can stay relaxed throughout this experience.
And human beings generally are so wonderful and so resilient.
Yeah. Oh, we are incredibly powerful, and most of us just don't know it.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good way to end. I mean, if nobody has any other questions, really awesome to speak with you, and thank you guys for joining us. Thank you so much, Manouk.
Thank you so much, Sunshine. And, I'm glad I could offer these insights. And I'm so looking forward to seeing you in just a few weeks.
Yes.
For our training. So, yeah, it's
We're
an
gonna roll
absolute
out the red
pleasure
carpet
to
for
be
you.
able to share the power and potency of. You don't need to do that. You don't need to do
some
that.
nights.
Thank you. Thank you.
Put some nights out with armor and stuff.
I can't wait to see you. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Manouk. Much love. Bye.
Take care, everyone.
See you next month. I think I'll do a straight healing next month and do some vortex healing. Keep you updated. Bye.
Sounds good. Bye.